Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first panel in the Notes from the Field series featuring Stephanie Aida Felix of Indeed.com. This is an Equity and Inclusion Fellows community conversation, and it is in partnership with Harvard Common Spaces. Harvard Common Spaces, for more information about their upcoming events, please visit their website at commonspaces.harvard.edu. And we ask for you all to join in the Q&A section, as this is an interactive event where you can ask myself and Stephanie questions as we go along. And our topic for today is a conversation on navigating the new career landscape. And this is just so exciting. This was an event that was born out of love and collaboration with Equity and Inclusion Fellows. And I am trying to, okay, well, let's just get started. Stephanie, your bio is not coming up for me. I'm having technical difficulties. No. If you could just introduce yourself to everyone and kind of give an overview of who you are and what brought you to where we are today and this conversation on navigating the career landscape.
Sure, I know myself pretty well, so happy to chat through my bio. I'm Stephanie Felix. Welcome, everyone. Really excited to have this conversation today. This is right in my wheelhouse. As Cassie mentioned, I am a manager at Indeed.com. I work in learning and development, and I manage a team responsible for building strategies for manager development, career development, and I also work very closely with our diversity, inclusion, and belonging team on diversity, inclusion, belonging training strategies. We're going to talk about this, but I actually thank Cassandra, for helping me realize maybe 2 or 3 years ago that my career path was been the exact opposite of linear. She told me, she was like, I don't think you're like upward trajectory. You're kind of like here. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Career paths that feel more like a zigzag or pivoting, and how fortunately, I think that life experience has set me up to feel more comfortable and set up more for success in the times that we're in now that feels a little bit more uncertain. And like we constantly have to navigate new challenges and move and change and be agile. I'm from the Virgin Islands. You'll probably hear an accent. Grew up in a multicultural family. I went to the University of Miami. I studied psychology and journalism there. And then I got my master's degree at Columbia University in organizational psychology.
Awesome. Welcome, Stephanie. The purpose of this is you're someone who I consider to, you mentioned agile. I consider you to be agile, to be nimble, to persevere through all kinds of adversity and just land on your feet. And just as you said, like in conversations that we've had about reaching goals, we oftentimes envision our goals as like this straight linear path, and it's not always how things unfold. And I think it's really important to center the conversation around developing skills that are transferable. And there's so much that you've done in various times of need. And so I was wondering if you could get into the things that you experienced where you had to make a shift and had to organize yourself to then gain the transferable skills that you needed, and give some context as to some of the things that you experienced to bring you where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to share. I saw someone post in comments about taking down the flyer. You should be able to change your view in Zoom, but if not, Cassie, just on your end with the flyer so they can see us and get engaged in the conversation. As I mentioned, my career has not been a straight shot. This is one of my favorite poems, has the line in it, life for me has been no crystal stair. I don't know if you all know that, but it's one of my favorite poems. And especially in the environment we are now, I've been able to reflect and kind of tapped into my fuel of resources and my resilience toolkit, I call it, to remind myself that I have been through hard and difficult things before, and I've gotten past it, and I've taken advantage of those opportunities. So as I mentioned, I did my undergrad at University of Miami. I studied psychology and journalism there. I was not a great student when I was at UM. I was not focused. And honestly, you know, coming from an island, I was not prepared. I wasn't prepared to study. I was not very disciplined. And so I struggled. And when it was time for graduation, getting into grad school was difficult for me. And I wasn't able to. So I moved back home, studied for the GRE, increased my score 300 points. And that's what got me to Columbia. I've been in New York for 10 years, studied organizational psychology at Teachers College at Columbia. And originally I wanted to go into consulting. I interviewed at all the big four, Deloitte, KPMG, and interviewed at McKinsey, basically all the names that you know, and no one wanted me. And so I shifted gears. Part of the reason I wanted to come to New York is because I love fashion, art, and creativity. So I did that for a while. I interned at D&G, which was the diffusion line for Dolce & Gabbana back in the day. I interned at Hermes, and then I also got kind of like my big break, which was an internship at Vogue, and it was a dream come true. That was something that I always wanted since I watched The Devil Wears Prada. And if I think about my career journey, that was really the time when I was exploring, you know, what is the thing that I really love and enjoy, and how can I start to build my experience and my exposure in that realm. And what's interesting about that is once I did it, I realized it wasn't for me. I was honest with myself. The industry felt very racist at the time. It still is. It felt very elitist. It didn't feel very inclusive, and we'll talk about that. And I didn't feel like I belonged. It also didn't feel like work that mattered. And so while I still appreciate like the art and the societal impact really of fashion and the industry, it wasn't for me. After that, I transitioned to learning and development roles in finance. So I worked at JP Morgan Chase, worked on really cool, awesome projects there. And then I wanted to understand the business a little bit more and expand my skill set and my knowledge base. And so I took a role at Blackrock, who was at the time known for their HBR article on talent. And I did sales training. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. It was not a good fit for me.
You jumped into the part where you just up and just said, that's it. This is not in alignment with who I am, my mission, my values. And then literally what happened around that time?
Okay. Yes. So I hated it. And
we have a question also, so we're going to get into it. Yes.
Okay. So I had a very serendipitous thing where on my Facebook, a sponsored ad, serendipitous or algorithms, I guess it depends on who you ask, but this opportunity to join this program where you travel and work remotely and internationally popped up on my Facebook. I was like, this is what I need. I was having a professional identity crisis. I've always known myself, very self-aware, but professionally, I felt very misaligned values and work. And so I talked to my company, can I do this? Can I do this for months? I pitched it to them, tried to create buy-in. And at the very last minute, they said no. But I already bought a plane ticket to Valencia, Spain. And I had already paid for the program. So I took a week vacation. I flew to Spain. A week later, I spoke to my manager. I let her know I had already left, and I gave them some options, which included my resignation. They were like, definitely. And so I resigned from my job and I traveled for 3 months through Europe, and it was absolutely beautiful. I do not recommend to anyone what I did. It was very, and if anyone is interested, I'm very open as to why I made that decision. But I was struggling and I was unhappy and I wasn't being my best self. And I traveled, I went to museums and cathedrals, and I connected with people in a way that you can only do when you're vulnerable and out there, open in spaces where you're uncomfortable and you don't know the language. So I did that for 3 months and I was broke. I came back to New York City. This was 2017. I came back to New York City for a few weeks. I celebrated my 30th birthday. It was amazing. I had a trip planned to Bali. I couldn't afford it, but a friend offered me to pay for my ticket, and she did. And so I went to Bali for a week, came back to New York. We had a Disney trip planned with my family. I did that, came back to New York. My lease was ending and I had zero money. And my family are like, it's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And they're like, you need to come home. And I was embarrassed and ashamed and 30 and unemployed. And I moved back home. And 2 days later, we had Hurricane Irma. And if those of you that remember that time. It is the most historic hurricane in recorded history. 2 days later, it hit my sister island of St. Thomas, and we were out power for 2 days. St. Thomas was like obliterated, as was much of the Caribbean. And then a week and a half later, Hurricane Maria hit my island, St. Croix, which is where I was living, and Puerto Rico. And I mean, talk about pivot. What was supposed to be for me 2 to 3 months returning home to regroup and figure out what I wanted to do with my life became an involuntary, you really can't leave, because we had no airport, we had no hospital, we couldn't reach our family in the States for a week, we had no internet, we had no power for 3 months. And if you want to talk about like vulnerability, I can get into that, but like showers get interesting, and your fear and finding food, and probably the hardest part of my life up until now, not knowing. And I remember one time talking to my mom, and she was like hysterical crying. She's like, can't believe you're back here. How did this happen? And this was before the hurricane, so imagine how she felt after.
I bring this up because from the move that you made from Blackrock, there are a lot of courses that we take here at Harvard and all throughout HGSC and the various campuses on negotiating. And there was a lot of negotiating skills that I think that you gained in leaving Blackrock. And although I don't know if you at that time, but even to this day, I would not want to negotiate with you. There are so many different steps that you have taken really to like working through and getting what it is that you want out of a situation. So, and that's a skill set that I feel like really was honed in probably before the experience at Blackrock, leaving and going off for 3 months and then coming back home. I want to read, but first there's a question. I see you go. How do cultural factors impact the current career landscape? As a new or potential new hire and future employer, how can we take these factors into consideration? So cultural factors. And
So I'm wondering if you mean cultural as in like ethnic or national culture, or like organizational culture. And I can speak to both in case it's helpful.
I said let's.
Okay, let's talk about both. So I mentioned I'm multicultural. I have an accent. I grew up in a place where I was not a minority. And so I bring all of that into the workplace. I think one, if you think about the concept of like intersectionality, and not from the negative lens of like disenfranchised or underrepresented, but really like what are all those pieces that come together for my identity? Having awareness about that is powerful because, and Cassie and I talked about this when we were prepping for the call, I have been able to pull together so much diverse, interesting, what felt like one-off or unhelpful experiences to kind of build my pitch for myself or competitive advantage. So for example, the first time I did production was at JP Morgan Chase, and I use that now with some of my passion projects. So being aware of like the different pieces of myself, the identity, working in finance, doesn't sound super excited, but I was able to do so much in that space that I now pull into my life today. Or if you think about culture again, you know, national or ethnic culture, I grew up in a multicultural household. My father's Puerto Rican, my mom is Afro-Caribbean. So I grew up around different languages. I grew up in an island where we have everyone from all the Caribbean. We have people from the States, we have people internationally. So I grew up in a place that is, you know, diverse and inclusive and open and different and just like high energy. And so you learn a lot about people and how they communicate, for example. So when I think about the workplace, I have met people from all over the world. And so I understand the nuance of like introversion or extroversion, how that shows up, or power dynamics and how that shows up if we think about the different dimensions of culture. So a combination of like self-awareness around your identities, you know, the concept of intersectionality and how you can leverage that. And then thinking about what those unique experiences are that tie to your culture that you can bring in either to your workplace or to your passion projects is, I won't even say it's like revolutionary, it's fundamental to spend the time really thinking about that. If we're talking about organizational culture, I think when we're navigating career paths, you know, getting as much a lens into the organizational culture of a company you may be interested in is probably the best thing you can do to set up for success.
What are
So
some
for
of the things
me,
that you do when you are setting yourself up for that, like to kind of like get a sense of what an organization's culture is like?
yeah, so back in the day when I was doing finance, I actually went outside the company building headquarters and saw how people dressed. I would just go and like watch people. You can't do that now, right? Because we're staying at home. But just to kind of give you a lens into the type of person I am, I would do that to see if people were in suits, if they were more casual. So I made the transition from finance to tech, and I was concerned that people wouldn't want me in the tech space because I'd worked in finance and people see it as such different industries. So when I was applying and interviewing with Indeed, I spent a lot of time on Glassdoor. I did a lot of research for like articles to see what had been written about it. There's a lot of like online forums where people will be very transparent about their experiences working for a company. And what's really interesting, and you may not think of, is I found images of the workspaces, and that'll tell you a lot. Is it cubicles? Is it open plan seating? Most companies are now. Do they have snacks? Do they have pool tables? Are the spaces like really bright and airy, or do they look more like kind of professional and traditional? And so I pulled all of that together to see that Indeed is probably a place that has a little bit more flexibility. You can be a bit more casual. It's probably a little bit more collaborative and relationship oriented. And you can wear jeans. So the first time I wore jeans was at Indeed.com.
Yeah. Now,
At work.
question, there have been a variety of employee resource groups and organizing that you've done to bring people together and
Mm-hmm.
environment to be more inclusive. Can you speak to some of that and how folks might, upon entering or already in a workplace setting, but now things have been moved online? What are some ways that folks can connect and get together and kind of bring some of that work with that takes? Let's also talk about what happens within an employee resource group, because it also exists in the education space. But I think a lot of folks know a lot about it and ways to leverage resources through your culture even.
Yeah, so I've seen many iterations of it. Inclusion resource groups, IRGs, employee resource groups, ERGs, business resource groups, BRGs. At its best, I interned at Prudential Financial 10 years ago. Still the best, still the best approach I've seen for, at the time, it was just diversity because this was 10 years ago. They integrated diversity strategy into everything they did. So like you're in recruiting, there's a diversity recruiter. You're in talent, there's a person with a diversity talent lens. And that makes all the difference because, what is now diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging space didn't feel like a one-off or a standalone. It was integrated. And so it felt, it was built into all the strategy. And when it's built into strategy, it can be built into execution. They even had like a World Food Day where they have a fair and all of the different employee resource groups would bring food from their country and you would go and it was incredible. It was the best thing I've ever seen. Kind of a second iteration of that was at JP Chase. So at JP Chase, I was a part of the leadership board for Adelante, which was the Hispanic and Latino business resource group. And I like that they call it business resource group because we were actually seen as a resource to the business. So they would leverage our talents, insights. For example, people on the leadership board or members were used to translate some of Chase's marketing, collateral, and commercials. So instead of outsourcing that or going or spending money, I mean, there's a point about the whole money thing, right? Because this isn't your job. So do you really want to invest the time in it? We can talk about that as well. But they were saying you're important, you matter, and we trust your perspective. And so really leveraging those groups to make contributions to the business. And so that was run like a business. We had charters, templates, we had weekly meetings. The head of the investment bank was our executive sponsor. We put on events. It was a massive amount of work. More recently at Indeed, the groups are different. It feels more like social and kind of casual. So they put on events and host as well, but it's more seen as like kind of like an extracurricular activity, which is nice because it reduces some of the pressure to deliver and perform in the way that you're doing with the job and creates more of that idea of like relationships, connections, and community building. So I highly recommend. I'm not as involved now because my job is so huge. but I consume a lot of the content. So for example, our Black IRG just started a podcast, and it's great because we can talk about a lot of the subjects that traditionally make people uncomfortable, like microaggressions or hair. Or I had a conversation with my team about nail art and the nail art I used to do, and how in some spaces I didn't feel as comfortable putting gems and colors on my nail. But I feel like I can do that at Indeed, which is a blessing.
Someone is asking, you were sharing your story and didn't finish. Could you share with us how you ended up at Indeed?
Oh, yes. My, yes. So
Hi, Miso. Okay.
yeah. So I moved back home just in time for hurricanes. And I told a friend, a mutual friend of ours, Angela, a couple of weeks ago, I feel like I'm always just on the edge of lucky. So I moved back home right before hurricane, but my family survived. You know, lucky enough to be in New York City during a pandemic, but I'm here and I'm breathing. And so a spirit of gratitude. I ended up staying home for a year. There was no internet, there was no power, and my priorities changed. You know, I wanted to go home, regroup, find a job, find an apartment, and move back to New York, but it was literally impossible. I mean, there was points when you're like, we just need to make sure we have water. And that's not easy to talk about. And sometimes I'm like, should I share that? Because people look at me differently. But I need people to know who I am and what I've been through. So I was home 3 months without electricity. So at that point, it was just survival mode. Once we got out of that, I'm a very creative person. So ideas started percolating. And I came up with this idea of documenting stories, which connects to my web series I started 4 years ago called Storied, and how we could catalog and curate the stories of incredible women. Because I think people needed to be reminded of, resilience. And I saw Elizabeth Gilbert once talk a couple of weeks ago, and she said, resilience is our evolutionary birthright. And I thought that was like the most beautiful thing I'd heard in a while, because we have evolved so that we could adapt and so that we can survive in this life now. So I started a documentary. I have not finished it because I got distracted. I started a documentary with our local PBS, and I was recording the stories of people as they rebuild after the storms. So I did that for a few months, but I wasn't making money, and I needed to make money. And so I decided to get back into the job hunt, and I decided what was a non-negotiable for me was to find a company that was mission driven and was more about, finance is just about making people money. I needed a company that believed in something and wanted to do something and wanted to help people and had a clearly articulated purpose and aligned with my values, and something I could feel proud to do, because I felt like if I'm going to go back into work, and I have to because I need money, I have to feel proud to step into this place and say I work for this company. And I interviewed a lot of places, and some of them weren't even aligned to what I just said, because sometimes you get in that spirit of like, I just need something. And then my soul was like, don't do it. You've been there. And I actually found my job at Indeed.com on LinkedIn, which is interesting enough. And I met with them, and I was researching this idea if we help people get jobs. And I'm like, yeah, this is so serendipitous or ironic, because that's what I need. And this is the space I've been in. And joining this company feels meaningful to me. And so all of that is to say, even when things feel the most dire and their toughest, and I think you can agree, I've seen some really difficult circumstances, do not sway on your non-negotiables. Don't do it. It won't be worth it. Something will come true and it will be better. I promise you. And so now I've been at Indeed it'll be 2 years in July.
We have a question on how do you feel that your master's in organizational psychology has helped you navigate your journey?
Yes, this is a great question, because it didn't help me in the way I expected. Teachers College, specifically in the program in org psych, taught me how to think, if that makes sense. So I thought I would come out feeling more like an MBA, like, hey, I can create these great business plans, and I can help you understand buy-in, and I can do this great analytical report that's like, and it wasn't any of that. It was like group dynamics and introduced me to the concept of privilege when I was at Teachers College, and we talked about, you know, human motivation and really in conflict resolution and the psychology of people. And yeah, I mean, it transformed my way of thinking. That was the first time that I had been introduced to the concept too of like being in the present moment and the power of that. And I still struggle with it. We all do. But if you can just sit in like this moment, for example, you're learning, you're asking questions, we have this great conversation, nothing else has to exist, and it's good, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong, you're not upset, you're not projecting yourself into the future. That is what Teachers College taught me. And at first I was disappointed because I would interview, and my first interview in JP Morgan Chase, which was about a year and a half before I got my job there, they basically told me I was too academic. And so that's something I'm sure, you know, some of you that are in education and in academia now are concerned about. They told me I was too academic. They're like, you have to take what you've learned and translate it in the simplest, like most actionable terms that you can. And that took me a very, very long time to figure out. So what I started to do is really think about, you know, what makes me especially unique? What is my competitive advantage? That got me interviews, that got me jobs. The more experience I got, the more I was able to translate my academic learning to like tangible, actionable things in business. And that was fascinating as I come back around. And indeed, we have so many opportunities to be more academic because people are so hungry for data and research because we're a tech company. So we have engineers and people with that background that are looking for that perspective. So it's kind of fascinating how it's come full circle. I have zero regrets about my degree besides the cost.
All right,
Good
so
learning.
we have a question on finance and tech. It's a great segue. With your finance and tech experience, how do you see multicultural women entrepreneurs overcoming less than 1% investments that go to women of color? And so, that's a big one. But if you could speak to the ways in which, you know, you are an entrepreneur and you're in an organization where you have the ability to function as an intrapreneur. And a lot of the conversations that we've had outside of this has been on the removal of equity when it comes to actually like equity, like pay me, opportunities. So with the finance and tech experience, how do you see multicultural women navigating some of that and increasing that 1% of?
Yeah, it's a challenge. And I can give my perspective. I won't say that I figured it out. I don't know that I figured out anything in life, but I'll share my perspective. The main thing that comes to mind is like identifying points of connection, points of leverage. So for example, I have a great manager and Indeed. She's phenomenal. I was talking to her once about like needing more time to work on my more entrepreneurial side, which is my web series and having those conversations, facilitating the layout, creating space. And she's like, yeah, but she's like, you can do that here. And, you know, of course I wanted to kind of argue. I was like, no, I need more time to work on personal things. But she was right in that what she was saying is that being in an L&D function, if I want to create dialogue or have roundtables or talk about privilege or intersectionality, I can actually literally do all those things in the workplace. It just wasn't the context that I was expecting, but I can have the same impact. And so when I say points of leverage, you know, really thinking about what parts of that can I use to like build my brand or make connections or practice, even not that you want to practice your passion projects on your real job, but really kind of capitalizing on the opportunities there. So I think if I interview somebody about their identity intersectionality, that's good practice for Storied, which is my passion project. It is a connection point. So maybe they might be interested in joining me on my entrepreneurial endeavor, either right away or at a later date. I'm honing a skill set and how to like generate dialogue and how to have good conversations with people. I'm building credibility, which is so like you have to build credibility. And that is a new learning for me. Because why choose you? Why choose you over all of the web series, over all of the websites, all the companies, all the articles, all the teachers, all the superintendents, all the, you know, publications? Why choose you? Credibility is a big part of that, and differentiating yourself so you're able to do that in the workplace as well. overall with the experience of women of, color in the workplace, it's not easy. And there's some very unique challenges around credibility. I saw someone post about Ahmaud Arbery and had an experience, and he was saying you can see parallels between the burden of proof that exists in like criminal justice and in the workplace. And that really spoke to me of, it's true, like if you say you've been victimized, or you don't have the resources you need, or you've been unfairly treated, that burden of proof becomes so much higher when you're a person of color, because you're just not believed sometimes. And with that, I will also say, like, know when to fight and know when to not, because sometimes it is worth it and sometimes it's not worth it. And so you have to find a balance with that as well. But overall, to that question, it's figuring out those points of leverage, building relationships, which I know is one of your questions that you had drafted, Cassie, and then taking that as an opportunity to hold that skill set and build credibility in both spaces or spheres of your life.
Have you found that navigating having a mentor or even sponsorship, has any of that been able to come into play in your career? And I also have a question all the way from Nepal. So I see you, and we're going to ask that question very next. Okay.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that earlier when I saw the question, and I'm like, I'm going to be honest. I've never been a person that's had mentors. And I was like, I'm probably an outlier. I'm a strong advocate for mentors. There's a lot of data for that. Everyone I know has one. So then I was thinking, well, what is it that I do have that's been helpful to me? The approach that I take is that I have a subset of women that inspire me, that I'll turn to when I need, inspiration, not even advice. That's the other thing. I don't really like advice, because advice is always colored by someone's perspective and their experience, and they don't know your journey. But I love inspiration. So, and some of these women I don't even know, I might like go and watch like Michelle Obama's documentary on Netflix, or I'm sure, well, some of you may have joined Erykah Badu and Jill Scott's battle the other night. And there's a moment, I don't know if you caught this moment, Cassie, but there's a moment Jill Scott is like, as a new up and coming artist, you didn't have to do my song. And Erykah's like, what song? And, she says the name of it. And she's like, you didn't have to do that. You didn't know me. You didn't have to do it. And Erykah was like, yes, I did. I did have to do it. And I thought it was, and Jill Scott gets emotional. And I thought that was, I'm like, geez, this is beautiful. Like, she didn't know her. This is two women. And because of that, who knows how that impacted both of their lives. And that's what I look for, more of these little pockets of inspiration. So I'll find videos or articles or even poetry. There's Nahira Waheed or Irsa Daily Ward. I'll read something, and that's more of what I do. But I advocate for mentorship for everyone. And then I'm a manager and I have people on my team. I also advocate for it for them, because it makes all the difference to have someone that you can go to that is like a trusted, safe space. And then sponsorship is like a whole other thing. If you can get that, that is like that person advocating, putting you out there, connecting you. Sponsorship is like good stuff. So,
and it exists in the field that's more K-12 education as well, which is where you may have a mentor who is a superintendent or someone who's at the district level who has had access to your resume, and what are they saying about you when you're not in the room? It's an opportunity or a role or something, and it's like you're just not even in the room, and they're elevating you and really speaking truth to power with your name and the things that you do very well.
Yeah.
For teachers. And so I'm going to go into Shiva Panta's question, which is, how do we align ourselves when the workplace values come into conflict with our societal values? And so this is interpersonal stuff here.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it actually came up recently because we rolled out values at the company, and just in kind of like philosophical dialogue, we're talking about, if a company rolls out values but the people at the company don't believe in those values, then what happens? A couple of things I would say: get ahead of it as much as you can, be proactive, be intentional in the places that you explore for interviews, research. I know, because I'm like a realist with a dose of optimism. I get it. Sometimes people just need a job, and I've been there. But I've also been in a position of being the person that just needed a job and took the job, and then I was miserable, and then I went home and I got trapped by hurricanes and devastation. So like, please believe me when I say sometimes it's not worth it to just take the thing. Companies are transparent with this now. You can look at the website. You can look at what they post on LinkedIn. For sure, if you're not spending time on LinkedIn, how are they talking about the pandemic right now? Are they talking about it from a people-centered perspective? Or are they talking about it from like a financial and business perspective? That's very interesting because it's telling you what do they care more about in this time. So when I say get ahead of it, be very thoughtful and intentional about what you are exploring and what you're investigating, what you're spending your energy on in terms of investigating like careers or job opportunities. If you're already in an organization or a company, you have to find the meaning and the purpose and the value alignment in your specific work and in your specific strategy. So maybe it doesn't exist at like the corporate organizational level, but what you do in your day-to-day, you can infuse that. So I know you had a question about how do I center diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at work. You know, all of that matters to me just by the nature of my experience, but also who I am. I'm a woman, I'm Black and Hispanic. So when you think about kind of the intersection, you know, we have, the data would suggest it's challenging for us. They'll put it that way. So I care about it just like inherently, but beyond that, I care about people and I care about people development. So like, if my value is belonging and inclusivity, when I look at how I manage my team, I infuse that. We joined Instagram Live with Marcus Buckingham, who has worked on a version of Strengths, and so we're talking about how I can tap into when they're the best selves at work and be a better manager in that way. Or if I think about the way that I do my work, let's say you're not developing strategy or you're not managing a team. Maybe you actually hate the work that's been given to you. How can I still bring in my values into that? So if I'm a person that believes in connection, I hate this project, but I'm going to collaborate and bring in diverse perspectives because what matters to me is connection and collaboration. So I'm going to do that in the way that I work. Or I'm a very creative person, but I got this super analytical, kind of straightforward project. Is the way that I can present it in a kind of non-traditional way so I can tap into some of my creativity.
Absolutely. Stephanie, let's talk about the future of work.
Mm-hmm.
This is viewed by some as, well, it is a turbulent time. And, you know, but by others, the perfect time frame to start fresh and to make career pivots. What do you think are the immediate needs now in the workplace setting? And then I'm probably going to follow up with all the turbulence going on, it's a luxury to be productive and to take those next steps, persevering. So we'll get into that, like following up to that, like one on the end of being productive, what's new in the workplace setting and navigating the career, you know, this whole career trajectory that we're all on, even if we're going in different paths. What is it like now, and what can you speak to in regards to the future of work?
Yeah, so there's a couple of realities with work. So I'll start kind of like grounding it in data. As of April, job postings have been down by a third. We are also at the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. And I was just reading an article saying that there's a prediction that it's like 14.7%, I think now, and it'll go up to 16, which will make it the lowest that it's ever, or the highest, I should say, than it's ever been in, you know, kind of since we've been chronicling employment rates. So, you know, the news is pretty dire with regards to, you know, job opportunities in the future of work. In terms of what's trending, literally right now, it is, you know, essential jobs. So things in the healthcare space, big corporations that do, you know, grocery and supplies and things like that, anything in the medical field. And then you will see trending probably around more of the tech space. I don't know that there's a lot of data out there about the specifics, but, you know, people are using social media more. Facebook is probably people more online. If you look at companies like, you know, Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, people are watching more movies, TV shows. So you'll probably see that trend continue for ever. I mean, people were binge watching before, imagine now. I think there is probably also more of a need for like the mental health space, wellness, self-care, more of that type of support. So it'll be interesting to see how that data evolves. In terms of the future of work, the things that you'll hear will be like gig economy, automation, software, engineering, and all of that is true. But like, how do you make that real for you? Like, what does that mean for me if I'm not an engineer, if I'm not a person that can create AI?
Out of education, especially like coming out of education. So
Right.
I'm seeing a lot of
Some of
learning
these
and
things.
development and a lot of like corporate training and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of folks actually moving education to online spaces. And so what are some of the technical skills that you think that people could really benefit from if they're in that productivity zone right now?
Yeah, so I think it's technical, but it's more than that too. So we talked a little bit about transferable skills. What I think is good is I think we're moving away from like you had to have done this job in this industry to get this job.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you understand like the power of transferable skills and how to position that, you're better off than anyone else. So project management, we talked about building buy-in, stakeholder management, budget, program development. If you understand those things, those are all transferable skills. So if you've done it in education or if you've done it in finance and you can talk about the impact that you've had in those different spaces, then you can sell yourself anywhere. So that's like the first thing you need to do. And you actually have to practice it. Because sometimes people will call BS. They'll say, no, you didn't do this. You're trying to like force, you're trying to force it. But the more that you practice saying, well, no, project management means stakeholders, deadlines, deliverables, holding people on track. If you become familiar with agile methodology, that is also really huge right now. And like product mentality, product thinking, and UX, that's big. You can take that and you can use it anyway.
About agile thinking, like anything that you know around, because it's so parallel to, especially if folks in the audience are specifically from the field of education, what some of that can look like or what that is.
Yeah, so I'm not anywhere close to an expert, but it's something I've been introduced to actually since JP Morgan Chase, so quite a while now. It's the idea of working in iterative sprints. So usually project management is like, here's the overarching, we're gonna work, and then it's done. With agile, it's kind of leveraging the way of the world now, where it's like, we're gonna produce something, we're gonna get feedback, we're gonna produce some more, we're gonna get feedback, we're gonna take that feedback, we're gonna build it in, we're gonna produce something else, we're gonna put it in front of stakeholders, you're gonna put out a version of it that's like just good enough, see how people react, do a little bit more, and then you kind of almost never get to final, because the idea is that continuous iteration is what produces good outcomes and good products. So it's the way that we work for the most part already, most of us, but it's just kind of adding a little bit more structure to that, like concept of like creating the sprints and the iterative process and getting people used to something that can feel maybe a little bit more time consuming, or that it's like a longer game, but it's really not, because what you don't want is to produce something and then you put it out and people hate it. And then you've already created this big, hunk of something that nobody likes. You can get ahead of that by taking that approach. And what I, kind of shifting gears from the technical side, I was reading this article saying the World Economic Forum just talked about how emotional intelligence is the biggest, most important skill set that you'll find in the future of work. So there's a massive amount of data. If you're interested in like specific articles, please message me on LinkedIn. I can give you my Instagram. You can reach out. I can send them to you. But the future of work is more what has been traditionally called soft skills, which are actually hard skills. So emotional intelligence, being agile, like we talked about, being adaptable. You will see a lot right now about empathy and compassion. If we think about what successful leadership looks like, it's empathy and compassion right now. The people, Airbnb, I don't know if you've read about what happened at Airbnb. You should. It is like mind-blowing, the kind of grace and thoughtfulness and generosity that went into their layoff. That is a company that people want to support and work for the long game. That is what successful leadership looks like right now. Empathy and compassion.
Give a quick shout out to Professor Robert Livingston at the Kennedy School, because he was a huge force behind collaborating with Airbnb to bring about some of those policies and shift the way in which they brought that out and carried that out. And that's now a model that's even being looked at in the education space, in the private sector, in the military. Just not that it's going to be replicated in all of these exact sectors, but just what were some of the leadership moves that took place. So if anyone can get their hands on any of that, maybe that's also something that is a resource through the diversity, equity, inclusion website that we can also just put, you know, some of the articles or some of the things that we mentioned today in a place where people can just go and access. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great because it is a model that we should replicate. And some companies are not in a position to do what he's done, you know, financially. But it's not just about that. It's about the thoughtfulness that went into the decision making. You can see that. Even, you know, I saw late last week, they put together a talent directory. I've never seen that ever in my life. For all the people that were let go, they created a directory so you can go and see the talent of the company that's no longer there. And I mean, you know, you can't ask for a better setup than that. And then creativity is the last thing. You know, creativity is a hard skill to showcase in an interview or in a resume. But the people that are creative are the ones that will be most successful because they can take this pandemic, the unknowns, the uncertainty, and they can create something out of it. And that's, it's a talent and it's special. So it's a combination of the technical and the soft skills for sure.
Let's just brush very quickly on that culture of productivity, but also in thinking of, I really do think it's a luxury to be productive. Having moved on to online classes, it really wasn't easy. And there were just some days that I was like, I'm just so like, I can't, like my brain is just not taking in all this information that's needed to be productive in a class setting. So it really is a luxury in turmoil to be able to produce and to be able to be creative. What about for all the things that you've been through, practices of self-care?
So with you know, what a productivity and the idea of it, I wrote a LinkedIn article about this, and I was saying you don't have to be productive. And that's not totally true either, because if you have a job or you're in academia, you have to produce something. So if we think about the actual definition of productive as in, you know, being able to produce, yes, you do need to produce. But when we talk about productive, we usually mean constantly producing or constantly showcasing the outcomes. What I think we need to do is like be as close to your best self as you can, but you have to have some self-compassion, because there will be days when you can't be your best self because it's just too hard. You're struggling. These are trying times. So holding yourself always to the same standard that maybe you would have held yourself in, I don't know, this time last year when there wasn't a pandemic, is not fair, and no one can do it. So self-compassion definitely has to step in. But in my mind, you don't have to be productive in a traditional sense. You have to do your best. So as long as you're doing your best, that is enough. It has to be enough, because there's nothing past your best. So that's what I use as a standard for myself, because what else can I do? I did my best, didn't work. Oh, well, this is what I have to give in this moment. There's nothing more. So, you know, good luck. You're going to have to accept what I've done. For self-care, I've been creating some boundaries, and I've been doing a really good job. I've come a long way. I was working in my bed, 2:00 in the morning, logging in on the weekends. I've left a lot of that behind, creating some structures around the day. I'm a Gemini. So the idea of having routines, it doesn't manifest for me of like, I'm going to do this at this time and this. It just feels like, oh, here's another thing that I have to do. But I've created a couple non-negotiables about like calling my family, doing a Netflix party, hosting a happy hour with friends every so often. Friday nights I take a bath. So things like that I stay true to, because they bring me joy. That's the other thing. What are the things that bring you joy? Do not do self-care stuff that other people say because they say it, and then you're like, I'm annoyed I have to do this. If it's face mask, if it's a bath, if it's yoga or working out, and you find yourself irritated or frustrated or not enjoying it, that is not self-care. And it could be worthwhile to spend some time like investigating and exploring what is that for you. It could just be boundaries. I'm starting work or studying or networking at 8 and I'm done at 6. And after that, it's my free time to live my life in any way that I want to.
So we had a question, which was, how do you practice innovation and implement creativity in your work? I do feel like you've answered that in some form or fashion, but if you feel like you wanted to highlight in that or go into that a little bit more, fine. But we also, we have like about 8 minutes left to this call, and I want to be respectful of people's time. So that might be something we come back to.
Okay.
We have another question, and that might actually be maybe perhaps what we end on, because it's going beyond academia and we're graduating soon, some of us. But we also have a question from Chia, which is, do you have any advice on creating boundaries? She's a Gemini too, June 19th. And so maybe
early birthday.
Go into that, and then we'll go into the next, that first question. We'll probably end on that one.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay, so I've had some difficult conversations with myself as of late. The very first thing is being honest about who you are as a person. So I took insights. I don't know if you all are familiar with insights. It's in the personality assessment genre, like HBDI or DISC, if you're familiar with that, MBTI, that kind of space. And I took my report, and it was a lot of hard news. One of the things it says is that I don't know my own limitations, and that I'll push and I'll push and I'll do and I'll do. And I'm so idea driven, and I have so much creativity, and I want to change the world and impact, that I will sacrifice my own well-being to try to do it. And when I read it, I was like, oh, that's hurtful. And so I wouldn't even share my report at first because I didn't accept it. But over time I saw that show up, the points where I actually like burned myself out, or I became so self-critical, or I had, how many things have I shared with you? Finance, fashion, web series, documentary, learning and development, masters. I've been all over the place doing everything. So that was the first step. Even that conversation with you, Cassie, where you said your trajectory isn't linear. You've been like this, doing this, that, and the other, has helped me to see like the person that I am, and that won't change. And that's actually good. And I think that's what makes me interesting. And so it's not to say to change it, it's just being aware of it. That's the first step. The second step, and this is hard, is navigate, like finding like, what is that thing? What is that thing that you love, that you believe in, that you have to do, that matters most to you in the world? And see how you can allocate more energy to that. So I spent a lot, I did documentary, my web series work. I started to actually structure my work such that there were points of connection and leverage, like I talked about. So some of the work that I do in my job mirrors the work that I want to do anyway. And then I started to structure that such that I could still have mental energy and capacity to work on Story, which is my web series. So in doing that, you should follow Storied Series on Instagram. So in doing that, I create a boundary around work, and I create a boundary around Storied. This is when I'm working, this is what I'm doing in Storied. But you wouldn't call it a boundary, but it's also an intersection point of like, okay, I'm having dialogue in Storied. I'm having dialogue at work. This is how I structure conversation. This is how I ask probing questions to get to the nitty-gritty of a person's identity. How can I leverage that across the two spaces? And then finally, actually create time. So there's a really interesting model I got in grad school called BART. I hope I don't butcher it. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's boundaries, authority. Is it responsibility and time? You're gonna have to look it up because I may have butchered that. But basically, it's a framework for contracting with yourself and with others. Boundaries could be actually physical space. So when I leave this room, don't talk to me, for example. Authority is like who's making decisions, who's the leader here. I think the R is actually roles. Who's responsible for what? And then time is actually time bounds. So, if you see that play out on a team, it's like, we're gonna have this meeting time, no distractions. You're the decider. I'm responsible for getting this, the notes out. We're gonna meet for an hour and then we wrap. You can take that same approach with your life. Like, this is who's deciding this. This is who I'm consulting. This is the time that I'm gonna do it. This is the space that I'm gonna do it. If you have a park that you can go to safely, or if you're doing it at home, and then I'm gonna spend an hour on it, and you do some time boxing. So you could test that out and see how that works for you.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. My very last question is, what are you most hopeful for in this time? What are some things you're
I am hopeful for the opportunity to create in the chaos. I was listening to someone talk, and they were talking about the space that's created now of like, there's uncertainty. We don't know anything. We're still figuring things out with the virus. People have lost their jobs. None of it is easy, but that creates some spaciousness, because you could argue like, what even matters, you know? And then you can spend time figuring that out. What matters for me? What are my values? Then how do I bring my values to life? How do I create? Flexibility, right? Maybe you're spending more time at home. Maybe you're bored. Some people get bored. I don't really get bored, but some people get bored. Boredom is a gift. Figure out something. What is that thing that's most important to you in life? How can I make it happen? And then forget about if people will like it, how they respond. Forget about all of that. It doesn't matter anymore. What can you bring to the world? What brings you joy? Those are the things that matter, I promise you. It's not easy. I know I make it sound easier than it is. But I'm hopeful that people will capitalize. I don't know how much time we have left. We're probably running out of time. 2 minutes. The opportunities. I mean, I think about Zoom. No one knew who Zoom was. I knew Zoom because of work. But Zoom is a household name. Took advantage of the opportunity. I think about nail artists. Okay. I just ordered a set of press-on nails. That's pivoting. That's opportunity. You know how much money they're going to be making? Just making the little kits, people making custom orders. Nail artists weren't doing that 2 or 3 weeks ago, but they're doing it now, and that's opportunity. That's opportunity to be creative. Or like drive-in theaters, taking it back, maybe revisiting ideas from our past that have worked. So that's what I'm excited for, creativity and connection. I mean, how many people have you talked to that you haven't spoken to in years, that you haven't spoken to regularly? So anyway, I think there'll be parts of this experience we will look back on fondly. Not all of it, because it's been really tragic, but I think there'll be pieces.
Absolutely. I'm leaving off with Tracy Jones, which she says, great idea and way of looking at what we're dealing with today. In quotation marks, what you said, Stephanie, the opportunity to create during the chaos. I just want to thank you so much for bringing hope, sharing insight.
You're welcome.
Time. And I know that you're very into connecting and networking as well. And so if folks reach out to you on LinkedIn, I'm just sending them your way. And we have a series of events throughout the week. We have an event coming up, an interactive exchange on equity and education in 2020 and beyond. And that is going to be with Misha Ross Porter, the executive superintendent for the Bronx, Dr. Jamie Hitchcock in the Metro Detroit area, Sophia Mendoza from Los Angeles Unified. That's going to be on May 13th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to thank the Equity and Inclusion Fellows, every last one of you, everybody who helped to put this event together, Common Spaces at Harvard University. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you so much, Stephanie. All the best to you in this everything that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Best of luck to everyone on the call too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.